Action. In the first segment, we're discussing how I've experienced hate groups, and they led me to a suicidal tendencies twice in my life. Once in a school for dyslexic, where they were especially disciplined, didn't sit well with me. And I'm paralleling it lately. I've felt it again in a civil suit against an outfit that I feel has the same kind of what they call Weltanschauung in German, or worldview, that the Nazis had in terms of their way of taking care of business. No, I'm not calling them Nazis, but what I'm saying is I experienced an escalation of harshness to the degree that I felt suicidal, and it was based on the systemic insular insolence of a normalized procedure. And I'm going to show you how these procedures became normalized via the Nazi model, from the Nuremberg laws to Kristallnacht, etc. And I experienced this, and I found it to be very hurtful. And what was so disturbing was, in retrospect, after I was able to digest what the hell had just happened to me, I said, Jesus Christ, this is a goddamn hate group. That's how they're behaving. And things came to light that I'll share with you now regarding how this whole thing went down. And what did happen is they did very badly wrong for no other reason than they could get away with it. And that's what the Nazis did. And they did it systemically through escalation, which I will explain in these images. And while the Nazis did this in the interest of maintaining the purity of their bloodline, that was their goal with getting rid of the Jews, the experience I felt was that this was an escalation of harshness because they could get away with it, but it was for maintaining not the purity of their bloodline, but for the optimus prime of balance of people, where they were, and they could do that if they had to. That was their modus operandi. But it was such a cruel number of acts. For example, this sort of thing, physical abuse. But first, before I experienced the physical abuse, I experienced a degree of a psychological abuse from folks that I call the French coolie bullies, who were a farmed out labor source. Anyway, we're going to go through this with the Holocaust model in stage 2 here. So let's come along here and start at this one. So that's the entrance to now it's a systemic group where they're full of shit. When I say that, I mean they come to believe their own worldview. Come in close and stand me. So here's what happens. They have a rigged system, and they establish that with the Kristallnacht, with the Nuremberg laws. And here's how a rigged system works. Because they have the absolute power, they got you by the cojones, and they can do whatever the hell they want, and they've rigged it that way. Here's what I've experienced, okay? Well, let me go to the German model. So here's what a Jew might experience in Nazi Germany in, say, like 1936, right when the Nuremberg laws are coming up and they're kind of ferreting out. And that's what happened in this business model. They're looking for the weakest link. And here's how this rigged system worked in Nazi Germany, where you didn't have a chance if you were a Jew. And one Jew said to his wife, I got to go meet with the Nazis. And she said, oh my God, we should leave this terrible country where we're in for deep shit. Nah, no worries. I was, in World War I, I was a hero. I fought. He said, well, I don't know, honey, it's pretty bad. So he goes and he meets with the German Nazi who's going to give him the star. And he says, I was a hero in World War I. I fought on the Western fronts. I did the mustard gas. I earned the Iron Cross. The guy said, 9. Well, I was a patriot, 9. I said, well, I won the Iron Cross, 9. So he gets back to his wife. What happened? Well, we're stuck. He said, well, what'd you get? 9, 9, 9. Well, nobody gets a perfect 10. It's a little joke, like a naughty common each. You see, they didn't have a chance. All he was going to get was no. Well, that's a rigged system. And they'll do that if they can. And we can do that legally in this country. We have a lot of freedoms. But you have to abide by certain procedural things if that's in your contract. You have procedural obligations. Also, we have a little thing called civil rights and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can't violate people's civil rights in doing so. So here's the Nazis. They had this horseshit, you know, work shall set you free. Well, that was crap. And they would say anything they needed to. Next image here is an interesting, this is a Jew who was a guard, stay on the shot, who was a Jew who was a guard in the Nazi camp. And the way I painted this, you can see, is kind of a hologram effect. So you have this eerie photograph of this guy, and he was called a capo. And he was used as a specialized labor force to inflict the concentration camp rule, prevent uprisings, and keep order. He had privileges, so he saved his own ass, but he was a particularly sadistic son of a bitch. Because, well, he couldn't kill you if you were an inmate. He didn't give him guns, but he had a stick. So he had a big wooden 2x4, so he could clobber you. Now look at this guy getting clobbered. Come to this image. So he could clobber you. He could clobber you with a stick, like this. Now I got a physical abuse with a stick, and let me tell you something personal here, okay? Still shot. This capo is a specialized labor force, okay? He's not going to kill you, but if he beats you with a stick, then you can't do the forced labor. And if you can't do the forced labor, then this other lady or guy who goes to the gas chamber will send you to the gas chamber because you're of no use to them. Well, when I spoke, come over here to this shot, when I spoke of the indignities, how hateful speech is followed by hateful acts, I felt the same thing from this, I say this woman who I endured this hateful speech from, and then I endured a terrible hateful act. And it was very upsetting to the degree that it came true. So she took, and I believe, gleeful delight, and I have evidence of that, gleeful delight in this infliction of cruelty. Now we're going to look at some of the ways the Nazis, because they were so deeply, systemically indoctrinated into the system that it was their job. For example, I'll tell you another joke. This one woman, she was a rough one. She was a Nazi prison camp guard, and they had women guards. And we'll get into some of her cruelty in a minute. However, she dated an SS doctor. And she was so callous and so indoctrinated into the Nazi system. Well, you might ask, how callous was she, and how she was so indoctrinated that when she found out the Nazi doctor she was dating had a degree of moral empathy for the Jews whom he was experimenting on in torturous ways that resulted in their death, that he had some moral questions, she broke up with him. Now that's callous, because she couldn't be surrounded. So that was the level of commitment that you have. I felt that. So how do they do that? Well, they have a specialized labor force, as I mentioned, which is this capo, and he can inflict this cruelty. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this segment, I found a systemic abuse to the goal of not racial purity, but of a balance. And that they used what I call the French coolie bully. The French coolie bully, to me, is not only an indignant to the person, but is a specialized labor force. Their friends have a gift of making them chic. And I've seen this all over the beach, and I'll go into specifics in a minute. But that is their method, and it's a systemic part of the system. So we're going to say exactly how this works in a minute. So, because this is all a well-oiled machine, when you have this indoctrination, you have these different moving parts. And as I say, I suffered physical assault and battery. These are allegations. So these are allegations of this. This would have never happened had I had not had the whole litany of up here of these experiences similar with harassment, indignities, and ultimately a civil rights allegation. So it just doesn't happen overnight, but it happens in a way that is a well-oiled machine where each part is integral. So the whole system is negligent, and we'll get into that in a minute.